Widowed millionaire hires a maid to play wife for a month, but their connection changes everything. The rain fell relentlessly on the city that evening, its steady rhythm muffled by the chatter of well-dressed elites gathered inside the opulent crystal lounge. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over velvet armchairs, and the faint clink of glasses punctuated the air as servers wove seamlessly through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne. Ethan Calloway leaned against the marble bar, his tailored navy suit flawless, his Rolex catching the light. His smile was sharp, his demeanor self-assured, bordering on cocky. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, glancing at the lively poker table nearby. It was a scene he'd mastered, a stage where wealth and power were the currency, and Ethan always came out on top. "You're bored," Lucas Wright's voice broke through the din. He appeared beside Ethan, his grin mischievous, his olive-green eyes sparkling with something darker than mere amusement. Lucas was the kind of man who thrived on stirring chaos, and tonight Ethan was his target. Ethan took a slow sip of his whiskey, arching an eyebrow. "Am I that predictable?" "To me, always," Lucas replied with a chuckle. "Face it, Ethan, you've conquered every game in this room. You need something new, a challenge." Ethan smirked. "You have something in mind, don't you?" Lucas leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I saw her again today." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Her?" Lucas gestured toward the large bay windows that overlooked the rain-slicked streets. A figure was barely visible under the neon glow of a nearby cafe sign. Her hunched frame sat motionless on a tattered blanket, clutching a worn cup that held a few damp dollar bills. "Abby." Ethan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "The beggar? What's your fascination with her?" Lucas's smile turned sly. "She's not just a beggar. She's a test of how far your charm can go. Think about it, Ethan. A man of your stature convincing someone like her to marry you. It's the ultimate game." Ethan's amusement faded, replaced by an edge of disbelief. "Marry her? Are you out of your mind? Afraid you can't?" Lucas's tone was taunting now, his words deliberately cutting. "I mean, you're Ethan Calloway, right? The man whose clothes deals worth billions. Surely you can handle one homeless woman. Or maybe you've lost your touch." Ethan bristled. Lucas knew exactly how to provoke him. "You're ridiculous." "Am I?" Lucas pressed, his grin widening. "Or are you just scared you'll lose for once?" The room seemed to quiet for a moment, as if the world had paused to watch Ethan's reaction. He set his glass down, his jaw tightening. "Fine. Name your stakes." Lucas's expression turned triumphant. "1 million, to be paid on the wedding night. But you can't just charm her. You have to make her fall for you, say yes, and walk down the aisle. No loopholes." Ethan stared at Lucas, weighing the absurdity of the wager. $1 million was pocket change to him, but his pride was priceless. He glanced back out the window where Abby's small frame remained unmoving against the storm. Something about the challenge stirred an unexpected thrill, a break from the monotony of his polished life. "You're on," Ethan said, his voice cold and resolute. He picked up his glass and raised it toward Lucas in mock salute. "To the easiest million I'll ever make." Lucas clinked his glass against Ethan's, his grin unwavering. "To the best game you'll ever play." As the night wore on, Ethan's confidence grew, yet a small unacknowledged unease settled in his chest. This wasn't just a game, it was the beginning of something far more complicated. But Ethan Calloway wasn't a man who backed down. Outside, Abby shifted on her blanket, oblivious to the bet that would soon upend her world. The following morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed in muted sunlight. Ethan Calloway stood at his apartment window, sipping his morning espresso as he overlooked the bustling streets below. His penthouse was a masterpiece of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, and curated art pieces. Yet for all its grandeur, it felt strangely empty, a silent monument to his success. His gaze drifted to his phone, where Lucas's taunting grin from last night still echoed in his mind. The challenge had been absurd, but now, in the clear light of day, it had transformed into something Ethan couldn't ignore. He thrived on being the best, and this was just another game to win. By noon, Ethan was at the cafe where Lucas had spotted Abby. The corner was bustling with tourists and locals alike, the air filled with the hum of conversation and the hiss of espresso machines. Yet amidst the movement, she sat motionless, her presence almost ghost-like against the vibrancy of the city. Abby Harper was hunched over her tattered blanket, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup someone had left her. Her brown coat, patched and frayed, clung to her small frame, and her hair fell in unkempt tangles over her shoulders. She didn't beg outright. She simply sat there, a quiet figure in a world that rarely stopped to notice her. Ethan paused across the street, watching her. There was something disarming about her stillness, the way she seemed both a part of the world and completely separate from it. He adjusted the cuffs of his designer coat and crossed the street, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. Abby looked up, startled, her pale blue eyes meeting his for the first time. They were clear and sharp, a contrast to her disheveled appearance. "Yes," she replied cautiously, her voice soft but steady. Ethan crouched slightly to meet her gaze, his expression friendly, non-threatening. "I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here for a while. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Abby's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to decipher his intentions. She was used to being ignored, or worse, pitied. This was new, attention wrapped in polished charm. "I'm fine," she said curtly, lowering her gaze back to her cup. Ethan smiled, undeterred. "I was just about to grab a coffee. Can I get you something? A croissant, maybe? They do a great almond one here." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment she didn't answer. "Why?" she asked finally, her tone edged with suspicion. He feigned surprise. "Why not? It's a small gesture. The world could use more kindness, don't you think?" Abby studied him, her blue eyes scanning his expensive coat, the effortless confidence in his stance, the way his words seemed too polished, too rehearsed. She shrugged finally, her voice tinged with reluctant acceptance. "Coffee? Black." Ethan's smile widened, and he stood, brushing invisible dust off his coat. "Black coffee it is. Be right back." As he stepped into the cafe, Abby exhaled slowly, her grip tightening around her cup. She wasn't used to kindness, especially from someone like him. Men in suits didn't talk to her unless they were muttering something about loitering or the city's reputation. Her instincts told her to be wary, but there was something about his persistence that felt different. Inside, Ethan ordered 2 coffees and a croissant, his mind racing. The interaction had been a careful dance, but her guarded demeanor had made it clear this wouldn't be as easy as he'd imagined. She wasn't desperate, and she wasn't naive. Convincing her to trust him would take more than a few charming words. When he returned, he handed her the coffee and placed the croissant beside her without a word. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the edge of the sidewalk. Abby hesitated before nodding. "Suit yourself." Ethan settled beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. The pavement was cold and slightly damp, but he ignored it. "I'm Ethan, by the way." "Abby," she replied reluctantly, taking a tentative sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter, and for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to enjoy it. "So, Abby," Ethan began, his tone casual, "what's your story? How'd you end up here?" Her expression hardened instantly. "That's none of your business." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough. I didn't mean to pry, just thought sometimes it helps to talk." She studied him for a moment, her gaze skeptical. "What about you?" she asked, her tone sharp. "What's a guy like you doing sitting on the sidewalk talking to someone like me?" Ethan chuckled, the sound warm and disarming. "Fair question. I guess you could say I'm tired of the same old routine. Thought I'd try something different." Different, Abby repeated, her tone flat, unconvinced. Exactly, he said, leaning back slightly. You know, they say the most interesting people are the ones everyone else overlooks. I think that might be true. She gave him a look that was equal parts disbelief and irritation. You don't know me. Not yet, Ethan admitted, his smile softening. But I'd like to. Abby shook her head, her laugh dry and humorless. You're either crazy or I don't know what you are. Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to catch her off guard. Maybe a little crazy, he admitted, but I'd like to think it's the good kind. For a moment the world seemed to fade, the noise of the street, the curious glances from passers-by. It was just the two of them, two strangers sharing a tentative connection. Abby looked away first, her expression guarded once more. You're persistent, I'll give you that, she muttered. Ethan grinned. I've been told it's one of my better qualities. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Ethan stood, brushing off his coat. I should let you get back to whatever it is you do. Abby glanced up at him, her gaze unreadable. Thanks for the coffee. Any time, he replied, slipping a card from his pocket and placing it beside her, in case you ever need anything. She picked up the card, her fingers brushing over the embossed name. Ethan Callaway, CEO, Callaway Innovations. Beneath it, a phone number. Abby looked up, but Ethan was already walking away, his confident stride disappearing into the crowd. She stared at the card for a long moment, the name feeling foreign and out of place in her world. What kind of man gives his number to a stranger on the street, she thought, tucking the card into her coat pocket. Whatever his game was, Abby decided she wasn't going to play. Not yet. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling for Abby. Ethan's polished card weighed heavy in her coat pocket, its smooth edges a constant reminder of their odd encounter. She hadn't planned to keep it, yet every time she considered tossing it into the nearest trash can, something stopped her. The city pulsed around her as always, a cacophony of footsteps, honking taxis, and hurried voices. But in her small corner near the cafe, Abby sat still, observing the world as she always did. The passers-by rarely acknowledged her, their gazes skimming past as if she were part of the concrete. It was safer that way, being invisible, or so she'd thought. It was late afternoon when Ethan returned. She noticed him before he spoke, his presence commanding despite his casual attire. This time he wore a leather jacket over a simple grey sweater, his usual air of superiority tempered by a more relaxed demeanour. He approached slowly, his hands tucked into his pockets, as if he were a friend stopping by instead of a stranger with unknown motives. "Back again?" Abby asked, her tone sceptical, as she looked up from the paperback she'd found discarded in a nearby trash bin. Ethan smiled, unbothered by her lack of enthusiasm. "You make it sound like I'm stalking you. Are you?" "Not intentionally," he replied, lowering himself onto the sidewalk beside her without waiting for permission. "But I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd see if you needed another coffee." Abby shut the book and set it aside, crossing her arms. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Ethan countered, leaning back on his hands. "It's coffee. There's a difference." She sighed, her expression weary. "What do you want, Ethan? Really?" The question hung between them, heavier than the hum of traffic or the distant chatter of cafe patrons. Ethan hesitated, his usual confidence faltering under the weight of her gaze. For the first time, the practiced charm he wore so easily felt out of place, almost inappropriate. "I don't know," he admitted finally, surprising even himself. "Maybe, to get to know you." Abby snorted, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Why would someone like you want to know someone like me?" The simplicity of her question cut through Ethan's defenses, leaving him momentarily unarmed. Why indeed? He could have blamed the bet, the lure of proving Lucas wrong, but there was more to it now. Something about Abby intrigued him, something he couldn't quite define. "Why not?" he asked, avoiding the deeper truth. Abby studied him, her blue eyes piercing as if she could see the cracks beneath his polished exterior. People don't just show up and decide to care, especially not people like you. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being doubted, and her skepticism struck a nerve. Maybe I'm not like other people. Maybe, she replied, her voice soft but unconvinced. Or maybe you're just bored. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're not wrong. I've been bored, trapped in this cycle of work, parties, meaningless conversations, but meeting you, this doesn't feel meaningless. Abby flinched as though his words were a weapon she hadn't expected. She looked away, her fingers picking at the frayed edges of her coat. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. Ethan pressed gently. I want to know. For a long moment, Abby said nothing. The city moved around them, oblivious to the small, fragile connection being forged on the damp sidewalk. Finally, she spoke, her voice distant, as if she were recounting a story that didn't belong to her. I used to be a teacher, she began, her words halting. Elementary school. I loved it. The kids, the way their faces lit up when they learned something new. It was enough, until it wasn't. Ethan listened, his attention unwavering. This was a side of Abby he hadn't expected, a glimpse of the person she'd been before life had worn her down. What happened? He asked softly. Abby shrugged, her shoulders heavy with unspoken pain. Life happened. My mom got sick. Cancer. I took time off to care for her, but the medical bills kept piling up. When she passed, I had nothing left. No job, no savings, just this. She gestured vaguely to her surroundings, her voice tinged with bitterness. Now I sit here, invisible to the world, hoping for enough change to buy a meal. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, his chest tightening. Her story wasn't unique. Countless people had fallen through the cracks of a system that didn't care, but hearing it from her made it personal, tangible. You're not invisible to me, he said quietly. Abby looked at him, her expression unreadable. Maybe you should have left me that way. Her words stung, but Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm organizing a charity event tomorrow night, he said, handing it to her. It's at the Metropolitan Grand. Black tie, champagne, the works. I want you to come. Abby stared at the invitation, her lips curving into a bitter smile. You want me to crash your fancy party? Do you even hear yourself? You wouldn't be crashing, Ethan replied. You'd be my guest. She laughed, the sound sharp and incredulous. I don't own anything remotely black tie or even clean. I'll take care of it, he said, his tone firm. All you have to do is show up. Abby shook her head, her fingers clutching the invitation. Why are you doing this? Ethan met her gaze, his expression earnest. Because I see something in you, Abby, something real, and I think you deserve a chance to see it too. Her grip on the invitation tightened, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject his offer and the tangled motives behind it. But another part, a quieter, braver part, was curious. Fine, she said finally, her voice low, but if this is some kind of joke— It's not, Ethan interrupted, standing and brushing off his jeans. I'll send a car for you at 7. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked away, leaving Abby with the weight of his words and the invitation in her hands. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The day passed in a haze of uncertainty for Abby. The invitation to the charity event lay on the edge of her makeshift bedding, the elegant script mocking her. The Metropolitan Grand— it might as well have been a world away. The idea of stepping into that life, even for one night, felt absurd. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb where she sat. The driver, a tall man with a crisp suit and a polite but expressionless face, stepped out and approached her. Miss Harper? he asked, his voice calm and professional. Abby blinked up at him, startled. Yeah? Mr. Calloway sent me to assist you in preparation for the evening, the man continued. If you'd follow me, please. She hesitated, clutching her coat tightly around her. I don't think... Mr. Calloway insisted, the driver interjected gently, his expression unwavering. He arranged for everything. Abby glanced down at herself, her patched coat, the worn boots that barely kept out the cold, the faint smell of the streets that clung to her clothes. A deep sense of inadequacy swelled within her, but something else stirred too, curiosity. Against her better judgment, she stood, brushing off invisible dust. Fine, she muttered. But if this is some kind of joke, I'm out. The driver nodded, opening the car door with a fluid motion. Abby slid inside hesitantly, sinking into the soft leather seats. The interior smelled of fresh citrus and cedar, a stark contrast to the street she knew. She gripped the edges of the seat as the car merged into traffic, her mind racing. The car stopped outside a boutique in an upscale part of town. The shop's name, Amara Atelier, was etched in gold lettering on the window, and inside, elegant mannequins wore gowns that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. Abby hesitated on the sidewalk, her stomach twisting. She didn't belong here. Before she could turn back, the boutique door swung open, and a woman in a tailored black dress stepped out. "You must be Miss Harper," the woman said warmly, her sharp features softened by a genuine smile. "I'm Gabrielle, and I'll be assisting you today." Abby started, but Gabrielle gestured her inside before she could protest. The boutique smelled of lavender and polished wood, and racks of shimmering dresses lined the walls. Abby stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure what to do with her hands. "We've been given clear instructions," Gabrielle said, clapping her hands. "Let's get started." Before Abby could respond, she was ushered into a dressing area. Fabric swatches, sparkling jewelry, and rows of high-heeled shoes surrounded her. Gabrielle worked with brisk efficiency, pulling dresses off the racks and holding them against Abby's frame. "What kind of instructions?" Abby asked warily as Gabrielle slipped a measuring tape around her waist. Gabrielle smiled but didn't answer directly. "Mr. Calloway wants you to feel extraordinary tonight." Abby's chest tightened. The idea of Ethan orchestrating all this was both infuriating and unsettling. She didn't want to owe him anything, yet here she was, letting herself be transformed. Hours later, Abby stood in front of a mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The gown Gabrielle had chosen was a deep emerald green, the fabric flowing like liquid silk. It hugged her figure in all the right places, accentuating curves she'd long forgotten she had. Her hair, usually a tangled mess, had been swept into a loose chignon, with soft strands framing her face. Gabrielle stepped back, her expression triumphant. "You look stunning." Abby swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I look different." "You look like you," Gabrielle corrected gently. "The version of you the world should see." Abby turned back to the mirror, her fingers brushing the smooth fabric of the gown. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel beautiful, even if it was fleeting. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabrielle smiled. "Now the car is waiting. You're going to be unforgettable tonight." The ride to the Metropolitan Grand was surreal. Abby sat in the back of the sedan, her fingers fidgeting with the delicate bracelet Gabrielle had fastened around her wrist. The city lights blurred past the window, and her reflection stared back at her, a stranger in borrowed finery. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance, Abby's nerves spiked. The building loomed before her, its marble facade glowing under the evening lights. Elegantly dressed guests milled about, their laughter and conversation floating through the air. The driver opened her door, and Abby stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished stone. The cool night air brushed her bare shoulders, sending a shiver down her spine. She hesitated at the base of the stairs, feeling the weight of 100 invisible eyes. Then she saw him. Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, his black tuxedo tailored to perfection. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief moment the usual confidence in his expression faltered. He descended the steps slowly, his hand outstretched. "You came," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Abby's heart pounded as she placed her hand in his. "I told you I would." Ethan's lips curved into a smile, but there was something different about it, something genuine, unguarded. For the first time, Abby felt like she wasn't just part of a game, and that terrified her. As they ascended the stairs together, Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "You're breathtaking." Abby didn't respond. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand, bracing herself for whatever came next. For better or worse, she was stepping into his world tonight, and there was no turning back. The Metropolitan Grand was a palace of light and sound. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their refracted brilliance cascading over the elegantly dressed crowd. A string quartet played softly in one corner, their music weaving through the hum of conversations and laughter. Servers moved gracefully between clusters of guests, their trays laden with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Abby Harper had never felt more out of place. The gown that had seemed so exquisite in the boutique now felt like a costume. Each click of her heels against the marble floor echoed in her ears, amplifying her self-consciousness. She clung to Ethan's arm, not out of affection but necessity, using him as a shield against the curious eyes that darted her way. "This is a lot," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the symphony of opulence. Ethan glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "You're doing fine. Just breathe." Breathe. It sounded simple enough, but every inhale felt shallow, forced. Abby's fingers tightened around Ethan's arm as he led her deeper into the crowd. The faces that turned to greet them were polished and practiced, their smiles masking subtle whispers and speculative glances.
"Ethan, there you are!"
A striking woman in a scarlet gown approached, her hair swept into an elegant updo. Her eyes flicked briefly to Abby, before settling on Ethan, her smile widening. "Rebecca," Ethan greeted smoothly, his tone polite but distant. "It's been a while." "It has," Rebecca replied, her gaze darting back to Abby with thinly veiled curiosity. "And who's this?" "Abby Harper," Ethan said, his voice steady. "A guest of mine." Abby forced a smile, but the weight of Rebecca's scrutiny made her skin prickle. The woman's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of disdain. "How lovely," Rebecca said finally, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I didn't realize Ethan had started inviting new faces to these events." Abby's cheeks flushed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan's hand on hers silenced her. He smiled coolly at Rebecca. "I find that new faces often bring fresh perspectives. Don't you agree?" Rebecca's smile tightened. "Of course. Well, enjoy the evening." As she drifted away, Abby exhaled slowly, her grip on Ethan's arm loosening. "What was that about?" "Don't let her get to you," Ethan said, guiding her toward the bar. "Rebecca's not important." "Seemed like she thought I wasn't important either," Abby muttered, her voice tinged with bitterness. Ethan stopped, turning to face her. "She doesn't know you, and frankly, she doesn't matter. You do." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe him. But the nagging doubt remained, a whisper in the back of her mind reminding her that she didn't belong here. As the evening wore on, Ethan introduced Abby to more people, business associates, old friends, socialites. Each interaction felt like a performance, and Abby struggled to keep up with the polished conversations and subtle power plays. Ethan remained by her side, his charm effortless, his confidence unwavering. But then came Lucas. "Ethan." "Finally!" Lucas's voice boomed as he approached, his grin as wide and smug as ever. He clapped Ethan on the back before turning his attention to Abby. "And this must be the infamous guest I've been hearing about." "Abby Harper," Ethan said, his tone sharper than before. Lucas's grin widened as he extended a hand. Lucas Wright, a pleasure to meet you. Abby hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes calculating. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he was eager to solve. Ethan's been full of surprises lately, Lucas continued, his tone teasing. You're quite the unexpected addition. Abby frowned, unsure whether to respond. Lucas's words felt like a barb wrapped in silk, and the way he glanced at Ethan suggested he was enjoying some private joke. Lucas, Ethan interjected, his voice cold, I think there's someone over there who needs your attention. Lucas chuckled, holding up his hands in mock surrender. All right. I'll leave you two to it, for now. As Lucas sauntered away, Abby turned to Ethan, her brow furrowed. What's his deal? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Lucas likes to stir the pot. Don't let him get under your skin. But Lucas had already planted a seed of unease in Abby's mind. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd spoken, it felt like he knew something she didn't. Later in the evening, Ethan led Abby to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the noise and the stares. They stood near a grand window, the city lights stretching out before them. Are you okay? He asked, his tone softer now. Abby nodded, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. It's overwhelming, that's all. You're handling it better than most people would, Ethan said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Better than I did my first time. Abby glanced at him, surprised. You? Nervous? Ethan chuckled, the sound low and genuine. Believe it or not, I wasn't always this polished. My first event like this, I spilled red wine on a CEO's white tuxedo. Thought my career was over before it even started. The image of a younger, clumsier Ethan was almost enough to make Abby smile. What happened? I apologized. Profusely. And then I offered to pay for his dry cleaning, which he found hilarious. Turned out he liked me more for being human. Ethan shrugged. People forget that sometimes. Abby studied him, her expression softening. For the first time she saw a crack in his carefully crafted persona, a glimpse of the man beneath the mask. It was disarming, and she didn't know whether to trust it. "Why did you invite me tonight?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he looked back up, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "Because you deserve to be seen. Not as someone on the street, but as the person you really are." Abby's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his words was almost too much to bear. She looked away, blinking back the sting of tears she didn't want to shed. "Maybe," she said finally, her voice trembling, "but I'm not sure I want to be seen by this crowd." Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing hers. "Then let them see you through my eyes." The intimacy of the moment was almost suffocating, and Abby pulled her hand away, retreating into herself. "You don't know me, Ethan. Not really." "Then let me," he said, his voice steady but quiet. Abby met his gaze, searching for the catch, the hidden motive. But all she saw was a man who, for reasons she couldn't understand, seemed determined to pull her out of the shadows. And for the first time, she wondered if she might let him. The ride back to her corner of the city was quieter than Abby had expected. The sparkling lights of the Metropolitan Grand faded into the distance as the black sedan wove through the streets. Abby stared out the window, her reflection blurred against the passing scenery. She didn't recognize the woman in the glass, the elegant gown, the pinned-up hair, the faint shimmer of makeup. It felt like she had borrowed someone else's life for the evening, and now she was returning to her own, piece by piece. "Miss Harper," the driver's voice broke the silence. "We're nearly there." Abby nodded absently, her fingers twisting the delicate bracelet still encircling her wrist. She hadn't had the heart to remove it, though it felt out of place now, like a relic from a dream she wasn't sure she wanted to remember. When the car stopped at the curb near her usual spot, Abby hesitated before stepping out. The cold air greeted her like an old companion, and the hum of the city at this hour was a far cry from the symphony of the grand. She glanced back at the driver, who offered her a polite nod before pulling away. The sound of her boots against the pavement was steady but hollow. Her corner was empty, save for the tattered blanket she'd left behind. She sat down carefully, the gown pooling around her in a way that felt almost mocking. The night had been surreal, but now, in the harsh reality of her world, it felt absurd. Who was she kidding? Ethan's world wasn't hers. It never could be. Ethan Calloway paced the length of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in his hand. The night had gone as he'd planned, almost too perfectly. Abby had been breathtaking, and the room had noticed. Yet, as he replayed the evening in his mind, he couldn't shake the image of her face when she'd asked him why he'd invited her. "You don't know me, Ethan. Not really." The words echoed in his head, cutting deeper than he cared to admit. She was right, of course. He didn't know her, not the way he wanted to, but there was something about her, something that had drawn him in from the moment he'd first seen her on that sidewalk. It wasn't just the bet anymore. He set the glass down and leaned against the window, staring out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Abby was likely cursing his name, regretting the entire night. And yet he couldn't stop himself from wanting to see her again. Abby was still sitting on her blanket when she heard footsteps approaching. She tensed instinctively, her eyes darting toward the figure emerging from the shadows. It was an older man, his clothes worn but clean, his face lined with age and hardship. "You all right there?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Abby hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine." The man frowned, his gaze drifting to the gown she was wearing. "Doesn't seem like it. You look like you just stepped out of one of those fancy parties downtown." Abby let out a bitter laugh. "Something like that." The man studied her for a moment before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small wrapped sandwich. "Here, looks like you could use this more than me." Abby stared at the offering, her throat tightening. She wasn't hungry, not really, but the gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the sandwich. The man nodded and shuffled off, disappearing into the night. Abby unwrapped the sandwich slowly, her hands trembling. The bread was stale, the filling sparse, but it felt heavier than any meal she'd had in months. The next morning, Abby was startled awake by the sound of approaching footsteps. She blinked against the harsh sunlight, her vision blurring as she tried to make sense of the figure standing in front of her. "Morning, Abby," Lucas Wright said, his smile as sharp as the tailored suit he wore. He held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, extending it toward her like a peace offering. Abby sat up, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" "Relax," Lucas said, his tone light but insincere. "I just wanted to talk." She eyed the coffee warily, but didn't take it. "About what?" Lucas crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Ethan. And you." Abby's stomach tightened. "What about us?" Lucas's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I don't know what he's told you, but Ethan has a habit of getting caught up in things that don't matter. You shouldn't take it personally." "What are you trying to say?" Abby asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her chest. "I'm saying," Lucas replied, his tone softening, "that whatever this is between you two, it's temporary. A distraction. Ethan doesn't live in your world, Abby. And you don't belong in his." Abby's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "If that's true, why are you here? Why not let him figure it out for himself?" Lucas's expression flickered, his confidence faltering for the briefest moment. Then he straightened, his smile returning. "Consider this a courtesy. I'm just trying to save you some heartache." Abby stared at him, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "You don't know anything about me, or Ethan." Lucas stood, brushing off his suit. "Maybe not, but I know how these stories end. Be careful, Abby." As he walked away, Abby felt a surge of defiance rise within her. Lucas's words had cut deep, but they also fueled a determination she hadn't felt in years. If Ethan wanted to play a game, she decided, she'd make sure it was one he'd never forget. The days passed slowly after Lucas's visit, but his words lingered in Abby's mind like a stubborn shadow. "Ethan doesn't live in your world, Abby, and you don't belong in his." She hated how those words gnawed at her, feeding the insecurities she had tried to bury. But she also hated that they fueled something else, a resolve to prove him wrong. Ethan hadn't reached out since the charity gala, and Abby told herself she didn't care. The silence was better than the question she couldn't answer. Yet every time she caught a glimpse of his card tucked into her coat pocket, her chest tightened. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast a golden haze over the streets, Abby sat on her usual corner, flipping through the battered paperback she had started reading days ago. The plot was predictable, but it gave her something to focus on other than the constant churn of her thoughts. "Reading anything good?" The voice was smooth, familiar, and entirely unwelcome. Abby looked up to see Ethan standing before her, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his dark overcoat. His presence was so unexpected, so out of place, that for a moment she wondered if she had imagined him. "It's something to pass the time," she said flatly, closing the book. Ethan tilted his head, his expression softening. "Mind if I sit?" Abby hesitated, torn between the urge to tell him to leave and the curiosity that kept her rooted in place. Finally, she gestured to the spot beside her. "Suit yourself." Ethan lowered himself to the pavement without hesitation, his tailored coat brushing against the concrete. For a moment, they sat in silence, the city's noise a distant hum around them. "You didn't have to come back," Abby said, her voice guarded. "I wanted to," Ethan replied simply. "Why?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The admission hung in the air, heavy and raw. Abby turned to him, her brow furrowing. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Ethan began, his tone quieter now, "that I've been living in this bubble, this perfect, polished life that's always felt a little hollow. And then I met you, and suddenly everything felt real." Abby stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt planted by Lucas and by her own experiences kept her walls firmly in place. "That sounds nice," she said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When I'm no longer the shiny real thing that makes you feel better about your life?" Ethan flinched, her words hitting their mark. "It's not like that, Abby." "Then what is it like?" she pressed, her voice rising. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels a lot like a game. Like you're trying to fix something in yourself by dragging me into your world." Ethan's jaw tightened, his frustration evident. "This isn't a game to me." "Then prove it," Abby said, her voice trembling. "Show me something real, Ethan. Not the tuxedos, not the charity galas, not the perfectly rehearsed charm. Just you." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her challenge sinking in. For the first time, he felt the cracks in his carefully constructed facade widen, exposing a vulnerability he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The tension between them was palpable as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to Abby without a word. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "An invitation," Ethan said, "to my world, the real one." Abby unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the address and time written in his clean, precise handwriting. It wasn't for another gala or event. It was a small cafe in a quieter part of the city, far from the glittering skyscrapers Ethan usually inhabited. "Why?" she asked, her voice softening. "Because I want you to see me, Abby," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "And I want to see you. No pretense, no expectations, just us." Abby stared at the paper, her fingers brushing over the ink. Part of her wanted to throw it back at him, to tell him it was too late, that she didn't care. But another part, the part she had buried beneath years of bitterness and self-preservation, wanted to believe him. "I'll think about it," she said finally, tucking the paper into her pocket. Ethan nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "That's all I'm asking." He stood, brushing off his coat, and offered her a small, tentative smile. "I'll be there at 6 tomorrow. No pressure." Abby didn't respond as he walked away, his figure disappearing into the crowd. She pulled the paper from her pocket and stared at it again, the words blurring as her mind raced. That night, Abby sat on her blanket, staring up at the stars, barely visible through the city's haze. The invitation felt like a lifeline and a trap all at once, tugging her in two directions. Trusting Ethan felt dangerous, but rejecting him felt equally so. Her thoughts drifted to Lucas, to his smug smile and cryptic warnings. He had tried to plant a seed of doubt in her, and she hated that it had worked. But maybe Ethan wasn't like Lucas. Maybe he was different. Or maybe she was setting herself up for heartbreak. Abby pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes drifting closed as the city buzzed around her. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, a choice she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The following day was unusually warm for the season. Abby had spent the morning debating whether to go to the cafe. She paced the sidewalk near her corner, Ethan's handwritten invitation crumpled in her pocket. Every time she resolved to stay put, a quiet voice inside her urged her forward. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something genuine behind Ethan's polished exterior. By the time she arrived at the address, the sun had dipped low in the sky, painting the streets in shades of amber. The cafe was small and unassuming, its wooden sign swaying gently in the breeze. Abby lingered outside, her heart pounding. This wasn't her world. What if Lucas had been right? She shook the thought away and stepped inside. Ethan was already there, seated at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He wasn't in a suit or one of his carefully curated outfits. Instead, he wore a plain white shirt and dark jeans, his hair slightly mussed, as if he hadn't bothered with his usual precision. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that was softer, less rehearsed. He stood, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You came." "I wasn't sure I would," Abby admitted, sliding into the seat. "I wasn't sure you would either," Ethan said, sitting down again. "But I'm glad." A server approached, and Ethan nodded toward Abby. "What would you like?" "Just water," she said quickly, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. The server disappeared, leaving them in the quiet hum of the cafe. Abby glanced around, noting the simplicity of the space. It was nothing like the glittering venues Ethan usually frequented. "You picked an interesting spot," she said, her tone neutral. "I thought it might be easier," Ethan replied, his voice low. "Away from the noise?" "From everything." Abby studied him, her skepticism softening slightly. "So, this is the real Ethan Calloway?" Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Something like that. I'm still figuring him out, to be honest." Abby tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ethan began, his gaze dropping to his coffee, "that for a long time I've been living a version of myself that everyone else expects. The successful entrepreneur, the life of the party. But lately, I've realized that version doesn't feel like me anymore." Abby's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but her walls were still firmly in place. "And what does the real Ethan want?" He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "To stop pretending, to actually connect with someone, with you." The sincerity in his voice caught Abby off guard. She leaned back, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Why me? Of all the people in your world, why are you here with me?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because you don't care about the things everyone else does. You see through the facade, and you're not afraid to call me out on it. You make me want to be better." Abby laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You barely know me, Ethan. Then let me, he said, his voice steady. Let me prove that this isn't just some fleeting thing. Abby stared at him, her defenses wavering. For so long she had kept the world at arm's length, protecting herself from the pain of rejection. But here was a man willing to step into her world, flaws and all. It terrified her. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've spent so long keeping people out. Letting you in feels dangerous. Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. It is dangerous, but sometimes the things that scare us the most are the ones worth fighting for. Abby's breath hitched, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to take the leap. But trust wasn't something she gave easily. I'm not perfect, she said finally, far from it. Neither am I, Ethan replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. But maybe we don't have to be. They left the cafe together as the evening air turned crisp. The city lights flickered to life around them, casting a warm glow over the streets. Ethan walked beside Abby, his hands tucked into his pockets, his presence steady but unobtrusive. For the first time in years, Abby felt a glimmer of something she had thought she'd lost. Possibility. It wasn't about fairy tale endings or sweeping gestures. It was about the quiet moments, the spaces where vulnerability and honesty could exist. As they reached her corner, Ethan paused, his gaze lingering on her. I meant what I said, Abby. I want to know you. All of you. Abby nodded, her heart pounding. I'll try, but it's going to take time. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan said, his smile soft but resolute. Abby watched as he walked away, his figure blending into the city's rhythm. She glanced down at the bracelet still encircling her wrist, the delicate silver catching the light. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Not for perfection or an escape from her past, but for a connection that might just be worth the risk. And maybe, just maybe, for the possibility of love. Weeks turned into months, and Abby and Ethan navigated the fragile bridge between their worlds. There were arguments, missteps, and moments of doubt, but there were also late-night conversations, quiet laughter, and an unspoken understanding that grew stronger with time. Ethan didn't save Abby, and she didn't save him. They simply learned how to see each other, the real versions, messy and imperfect and human. And in that, they found something neither of them had expected, the strength to rewrite their own stories together. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. What began as a reckless wager became a journey of self-discovery, vulnerability, and connection. Ethan and Abby taught us that love isn't found in perfection or wealth, but in the courage to embrace each other's flaws and build something real together. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the choices we make and the people we overlook, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.